Although each presenter could speak alone for 2 hours apiece, today each speaker will have 35 to 40 minutes. I am reserving questions for everyone until the end, time permitting. You may submit your question through the chat line. Today, my first speaker is Henny Lasley with Smart Colorado. This is a nonprofit organization that focuses on youth protections regarding marijuana. Henny, thank you.
Good morning. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. Can everyone hear me? So you should see a full screen of my presentation. So my colleague Julie Dryfault is also on the call. So Julie, if there's anything that you're not hearing, then would you please shoot me a quick text and we'll try to get that fixed. I appreciate everyone's patience given the technology challenges. It's added a certain level of interest to what we're doing this morning. I want to thank everyone for taking their time to learn about Smart Colorado and what we've been doing in the state, and appreciate your attention. And I look forward to any questions that you have at the end of the presentation. So a little bit about Smart. Smart Colorado formed after the passage of Amendment 64, which of course authorized the possession and commercial sales for recreational marijuana for anyone over the age of 21 in our state. This of course came after the passage in the year 2000 of Amendment 20, which authorized marijuana to be used for medical or medicinal purposes. So Smart Colorado formed after the passage, and again, we decided to come together as an organization because when Governor Hickenlooper formed the regulatory task force to put the regulations in place, we were concerned that kids were ranked at the bottom of the priority list and the impacts. We had no roadmap from across the country to really take a look at the impacts on kids when marijuana then became available recreationally. So our sole focus was to really work on minimizing the unintended consequences and the risk to kids. We have about 10,000 members across the state of Smart Colorado, and we have many that voted both for and against marijuana legalization. Our efforts have been endorsed by our 4 ex-living governors. And our organization is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. And we don't work alone. We work with many across the state with respect to youth, parents, leaders from education, healthcare, law enforcement, you name it. We try to engage other organizations. So why does this matter? And I wanted just to show a couple of images. The image on the left is a photo from the 420 rally down in Denver at Civic Center Park that was held, I believe this was about 4 years ago. And it just, to me, this image is so powerful because it shows that while recreational marijuana is designed for anyone over the age of 21, we can see that the impacts to kids, the young adults that are there, but most impactfully, the child sitting on the shoulder of the adults, to me always has just been a very profound, powerful images. And regardless of how anyone feels about adult use and whether or not you as an adult choose to use marijuana, we all should be able to agree that our children only have one chance to grow up, which is actually the name of our new initiative as we go forward as an organization. So Smart Colorado's priorities really include the following. As just for a point of reference, this image was a billboard that we put up in 2014, right after legalization and commercialization started. And it went viral across the globe, and that is an understatement. It was huge because we're the first state. But it does exemplify really what we are trying to say is not whether or not THC is available for adults, it's whether or not we've given everyone the right tools to be able to utilize it and make sure that our kids are protected. So our four big priorities include that we are about limiting THC potency in products. We believe that opting out of commercialization is very important. We've held that line since the very beginning, or it should be very strictly limited and protected for kids. That we have robust education, including full disclosures and research, and that again, the strict minimum age requirement of 21 plus remain in effect. So last year, we had the first warning that came out from the federal government since the 1980s. And this was a profound statement that the feds actually went in because, of course, marijuana is still illegal under federal law. So the fact that the Surgeon General gave this warning about the health risks, especially for adolescents and during pregnancy, was very profound. So we're going to talk some more about that. So to us, one of the big things that we need, that we always really ask citizens to consider is that really policy matters. And the big changes, of course, between that is we decriminalized marijuana in small possession amounts many years ago. But there are big differences between the decriminalization and the important criminal reforms that are now in process for making sure that kids especially are not held for their entire lives for perhaps a small amount of marijuana possession as a young person. But there are just big differences between the decriminalization of marijuana, the legalization of marijuana, where an individual can grow within their house. And then, of course, the big impact to kids is the legalization and the full-blown commercialization of marijuana. So this is a snapshot of what our state looks like at the end of June during this year. You can see that we have more marijuana dispensaries across our state than we have McDonald's and Starbucks. And it also shows that we have approximately 41,000 employees across the state. So the other thing that's very important to note is that while many of the large municipalities have opted into recreational sales, 70% of the Colorado jurisdictions have actually opted out of recreational sales. And I'd like to point out that Amendment 64, the provision within the state constitution, was just as clear that municipalities had the right to opt out or not opt in to marijuana sales. So this is as important a reason as any, is that the Constitution allowed for local control and for citizens to make decisions for their own communities. So again, as I pointed out, we're going to talk about kids and the impacts on kids. And so I wanted to point out that the Healthy Kids Colorado survey, which is a every 2-year survey that is released and collected by the Colorado State Health Department, was released in August of this year. And I'd like to point out that 20% of Colorado youth self-reported using marijuana, which is a number that has remained statistically stable over the past year since legalization. So it's interesting that while this number has remained stable, what we're going to talk about is when you look under the covers a little bit of how things have changed with what youth have reported using. One concern that COVID-19 has truly brought to the conversation is that during the last budget cycle, with the huge hit that COVID-19 imposed on the state budget, 79% of the prevention dollars geared towards youth evaporated overnight due to the budget crisis. So while youth rates have stayed stable, 79% of the budget dollars that helped keep that number stable have now evaporated. So when I talked a little bit about the Healthy Kids Colorado survey and the importance of it is I'd like you to just spend a moment, and I hope you can see this chart, that what has really changed in our profound takeaway is that it's not that the fact that the same number of kids are still using marijuana, it's that the way that they actually intake marijuana has changed significantly. And the biggest factor is that now kids are, 50% of the kids that reported using marijuana dab marijuana concentrate, which is a highly purified form of marijuana. And the health risks are profound for our youth. As we would suspect, the vaping crisis has increased the amount of kids that have now vape marijuana, because many people didn't realize that marijuana could also go into a vape pen. The number of kids that actually use edibles remain relatively stable. An interesting factor on this chart is to show that what many adults think about when they think about marijuana is actually smoking weed. Maybe you remember from your youth or even today that most people equate marijuana with actual the old weed in a baggie. And you can see from this chart that the number of kids that have reported using smoked product has gone down significantly. That's a big change to show that the kids are actually tracking in the adult with adult use. So one of the concerning factors is that kids are dabbing and vaping marijuana almost 3 times more like, excuse me, 3 times more than adults are using these forms of marijuana. And the health concern is that there are risks associated with psychiatric disorders such as schizophrenia, psychosis, and generalized anxiety when it's used in a high concentration form. And 93% of the products that are sold in our state are considered high potent. And all labels of marijuana do state that the products have not been adequately studied or proven safe. So if you haven't worried about kids and the impact, here's one thing that you might want to think about when it's time to get out on the roads, is that there was an over 300% increase in the number of kids that reported using marijuana and then driving high. And this is something that SMART will take back to the state when it's time to readdress prevention monies. This is, to me, a very concerning indicator that kids have bought off on the messaging that marijuana is safer than alcohol. So I want to talk a little bit about dabbing and what that means in terms of high concentrate pot. And it is sold every day in our state, and it's a very small amount of concentrated THC that goes into what's called a dab rig. And I'm going to do a visual of what that process actually looks like.
This is dabbing, a more potent and increasingly popular way of using high THC pot. Just a hit is 10 times stronger than a joint or higher. So popular, it's hard to keep up with the nicknames. Honey, honeycomb, shatter, butter. The dab is the gooey or hard substance placed in the glass, then lit with a butane torch. If you want to know more about this, just ask your kids. This is...
So why dabbing is so, I'm sure all of you are familiar with the term 420, which was the celebration of marijuana prior to legalization. That festival still continues in Denver and across the country. But one of the things that's trending now is a new celebration called 710, which if you turn 710 upside down, it spells out the word oil, which actually celebrates the use of marijuana concentrates. So this is yet another example of where there's an underlying message to youth in a way that many adults aren't familiar with. And our job at SMART is to really help adults be informed about what types of messaging actually hits kids. And just as an example, this is actually a sign across from the middle school where my children attended long ago, far away, but you can see that the highway sign was sponsored by the 710 Festival. Fortunately, I know some folks over at CDOT, and I was able to get this sign removed because many adults have no idea that this is, again, celebrating marijuana in our state. So one thing that we also watch very carefully is that as youth perception about the harms of marijuana goes down, youth use tends to go up. And so we're watching this indicator very closely. And this number has stayed relatively stable, but I think it does show the concern about all marijuana products being basically viewed by children as the same health risks. And the fact that our state sells marijuana, the exact same products, both on the medical or medicinal side as the recreational side, sends a very dangerous message to our kids. Okay, so let me see why my screen is frozen here. So I'd like to move on to just do some of the, what I would call education for adults to understand. If you have not been into a recreational dispensary in any of the municipalities around the state, I just wanted to kind of review some of the products. And again, our big thing at SMART is to make sure that parents understand that THC comes in almost all forms.
Ramey Johnson's doing a marijuana thing. This is quite frightening.
So the symbol there, THC, was a piece that SMART Colorado actually put into legislation right after legalization, so that adults had a way of identifying whether or not THC was contained in a food product. And this is setting a best practice across the country. And again, I always align this to when my children were small. I needed to have a teaching tool, and the first one we ever taught kids was a stop sign. So kids need to know that this is a symbol that identifies that there is a psychoactive agent in what they're consuming. There's a tremendous amount of confusion with the explosion in the CBD market, which does not create a high for the user, but is often used for pain. And so I think it's important that we understand that what we're really focused on is the THC concentrates and the THC that's in things that resemble everyday foods. So THC methods really happen from top to bottom. And that includes eye drops, nasal sprays. You can smoke THC, you can vape it, you can dab it, you can eat it, you can drink it, you can inhale it. You can use it as a topical body lotion, including lip balms, lotions, and oils. They're used as personal lubricants and even rectal and vaginal suppositories. Again, our concern about these types of products is that they allow for THC to be hidden from the rest of the population. So one of the things that Smart Colorado does is we go shopping, and we have a website called thcphotos.org, where we actually go into dispensaries, purchase product, photograph those products, and give a description so that individuals that perhaps don't use marijuana have a point of reference. And these are some examples here of what today's marijuana truly looks like. And we're going to go over some of these specifically. So this is an example of where marijuana and THC comes in the form of a tea, also in the honey that goes to sweeten tea. It comes in the form of pills, mints, and sweets. And these are all available every day in the recreational market here in Colorado. Of course, there's THC candy. And now on the market is what looks like an albuterol inhaler, which is particularly frightening because if I'm a teacher in a classroom, how do I know what that kid is actually using? Is it to help an inhaler for asthma, or is it a THC concentrate? This product is interesting because it talks about the CBD component, when in essence there's 7 times the amount of THC in this particular product than in CBD. We have THC invisible powders. These powders can be dropped into any type of liquid, but they can also be sprinkled across any type of other food. These, of course, are impossible to mark, so it's very difficult, and again shows the desire to hide THC. This was the first THC and alcohol crossover that we found. It's considered a drink rimmer, which would line, for example, an alcoholic beverage like a margarita, and we also saw one for like a Bloody Mary. So this was the first effort we saw to do an actual crossover. This one is a breath mint, which has, as you can see at the top, a THC potency of 98%. And that goes underneath the tongue or in the mouth, and so that hits the sublingual tissues. This is an example of a personal lubricant that can be used by adults, but also another way for kids to hide the THC use. So Colorado kids are being harmed, and some of those examples are, we have the second highest youth use in the nation. Our teen vaping crisis here in our state is we are twice the national average. We are actually first in the country in terms of kids vaping. We saw statistically significant increases in dabbing, vaping, and edibles, which subsequently caused more emergency department visits for adolescents, and 71% of those were actually diagnosed or evaluated for a mental health issue. One other thing that's very concerning is that as we've normalized marijuana use in our state, we had a private physician come in and testify in front of the legislature, and you can see that THC positive babies is on the increase in our state and has gone from 2 to 3% up to 10 to 12% in 2018. And here's some of the reasons why it matters. So one thing is that our science is way behind what's actually available in the commercial market in our state. And so these studies were conducted on 2 to 8% potency. So we know that youth that use have deficits in learning, memory, math, and reading skills. It's associated with a failure to graduate from high school or finish college, and more are likely to experience psychotic symptoms as adults. They also may become addicted, but treatment can decrease the use of dependence, and often we hear that marijuana is not addictive. In essence, it is addictive, and there's sound science that proves that. We know that if kids quit, they will improve their brains and have lower risk of adverse cognitive and mental health outcomes. Our schools have reported that the #1 issues that they're facing is marijuana in the schools and the impacts of that. And Cherry Creek School District superintendent, he's now retired, basically said the only thing that legalization of marijuana and the tax revenue question has brought into the schools at Cherry Creek is more marijuana. So just to give a flavor of the college statistics, you can see here that Colorado colleges, universities have double the actual youth use marijuana rate at the college level than those across the nation. And then, of course, we need to talk a little bit about the vaping crisis, which now has been overshadowed in the media by COVID-19. But this is actually, interestingly enough, a screenshot of my colleague Julie, who's on the phone, her college friend's son, who was the recipient of the first double lung transplant in the state of Michigan. Actually, his lung transplant was the first across the country associated with the vaping crisis. And he was 17 at the time and is still recovering from that transplant. Where e-cigarettes and marijuana has really begun to crossroads is the fact that kids that vape nicotine are 5 times more likely to use marijuana. And what's been extremely disturbing is that many kids don't really fully understand that there is nicotine in those vape pens, and also they just believe that it's flavored water. So we're seeing positive steps being taken on vaping, and so we're really encouraged by that, but we can't let our guard down about that vaping does tie to marijuana use. And this was according to Rise Above Colorado. Again, marijuana is seen as a concerning statistic around mental health for our kids. And you can see here that kids that do suffer from what they call a difficult mental health days are more likely to try alcohol, marijuana, and prescription pain relievers. One of the things that's most concerning, again, these are all concerning statistics, and I'm sorry to bombard you with so many, but we have a high rate of suicide, teens that complete suicide in our state. And while there's no association, it is important, and it's really a data point that I believe that the state needs to look at much more deeply, is the fact that marijuana is the number one, THC is the number one substance found in the toxicology reports of the children in our state that have died by suicide. Again, not saying this is a causation, but I do believe that it's something that we need to really take a deeper dive into as the adults that are in charge of our kids. This is just a map. It's very difficult to read, and I apologize, but this shows a map from the city of Denver. And the darker the blue, the more disparities and concerns that we have around kid health outcomes, the child well-being impacts. And you can see from the number of dots that the darker the blue, there tends to be a higher concentration of marijuana commercialization and outlet density. And this map was created by the city of Denver. So some of the things that we do at SMART really involve a lot of public awareness. We ask questions because there's a lot of unknowns still around THC. But what's important for us to really understand is that in the Netherlands, there was a scientific group of researchers that basically pointed out that a THC potency over 15% really should be considered a hard drug. And so we feel a responsibility to ask that on behalf of our kids. And this was a billboard that we put up a couple of years ago in the Denver metro area. One of the things that we were able to do in the legislative session was to make sure that we're beginning to educate. We collaborated with the marijuana industry and sent by snail mail this sign to post in every dispensary as required by the Colorado legislature. And we were really appreciative of the marijuana industry for posting these signs, and we had a 15% ask for additional copies of the signs. So this was an important step to begin educating pregnant women. So I've talked a lot, but what I'd really like to do is just let you know that we are here. We believe that protecting kids is a responsibility for everyone, regardless, again, how you feel about adult use. And there's ways you can help. You can get involved with our organization. Please, to keep timely and up to date about it, please feel free to sign up with us. Our information is free. We talk to parent groups. Get to know your elected officials, not only at the city level, but also your state and your federal officials, and find out how they feel about marijuana use and what protections need to be put in place for kids. And it's also important to learn about THC and the impacts on children. And we know as a protective factor from the state health department that what adults think about kids using marijuana really does impact their ability to say, maybe that's not such a good idea for me. So on a personal note, I was one of the co-founders and am one of the co-founders of SMART because my family was negatively impacted by our child using marijuana as an adolescent. And I made it my mission to make sure that no other adult, if I can help educate and protect anyone else's family around this, it was worth it to me. And so I really do believe that information is power, and your involvement to protect kids is most important. So thank you for your time, and I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and send it back to Diane.
Oh my goodness, Henny, I learned a lot of things myself. I actually had no idea that THC could be used topically. Now that is very scary to me. Also, perhaps would there be a way that we could get a copy of your slides afterward? Okay, thank you. I'd like to go to my next speaker, who is Wendi Roewer. And Wendi is the Field Intelligence Manager for the Drug Enforcement Agency and will be speaking to the criminal trafficking of drugs, including marijuana. So Wendi, it's all yours.
Okay, well, thank you. Good morning. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Today, it's going to be my goal to provide you with a general overview of what DEA offices in Colorado see with regard to marijuana trafficking and the criminal organizations that are involved in large-scale marijuana production and trafficking in the state. DEA's mission is to target and disrupt and dismantle drug trafficking organizations at every level. We follow the investigations up the organizational food chain to the highest levels and to the ultimate drug sources of supply. So you're going to hear me refer a lot to DTOs, and when I say DTO, I'm referring to drug trafficking organizations throughout this presentation. So what we have seen since marijuana was legalized in Colorado, specifically since recreational marijuana was legalized in 2012, we've seen an increase in DTOs, many of which are poly-drug trafficking, not just marijuana, and they're poly-criminal organizations as well that are involved in producing and trafficking marijuana and marijuana products. Many of these organizations came to Colorado from other states and other regions within the US for the sole purpose of setting up large-scale marijuana cultivation and production operations. So as a result, we have many criminal organizations throughout the state that control networks that consist of literally hundreds of grow sites capable of producing massive amounts of marijuana. All of that is sold on the black market, so there's obviously no tax revenue coming to the state. And most of it is sold in out-of-state markets throughout the US where it commands a much higher price. So why Colorado? Across the country, I think we're up to 33 states plus Washington, DC that have some form of legalized marijuana. So why is it that Colorado has become such a primary source for black market weed? It's largely the private residential grows that are allowed under state law. With regard to marijuana production and home grows, Colorado is actually the outlier among those 30-some states that have legalized. Of the states that have legalized some form of marijuana, 12 explicitly prohibit home grows. Of the states that do allow for home grows, they fall largely within that 6 to 12 plant range. Now these can vary somewhat as to how many can be mature plants and how many can be seedlings, but they're largely all within that same range. But then there's Colorado. Colorado's law allows for up to 99 plants per medical marijuana patient. There's actually no legal limit on how much marijuana a physician can recommend for a patient. And for about $500 to $700 cash, there are more than a few physicians in the state that provide patient recommendations for up to 99 plants. A medical marijuana patient can still get a recommendation for more than 99 plants. He just has to get a licensed marijuana business to grow anything above the 99 plants. And it wasn't even until 2017 that patients and private caregivers were limited to the 99 plants. Up to that, there was no limit. And there's no mechanism at the state level to regulate home grows, even these large ones. As I'm sure most of you know, Amendment 20 actually legalized medical marijuana in Colorado back in 2000, so 20 years ago now. Most of the large residential grows that we encounter operate under the parameters of what is allowed under Amendment 20 in the medical marijuana system. Anyone in Colorado can get a medical marijuana card with the recommendation of a doctor, and the law as written allows a patient to grow up to 6 plants unless the doctor recommends more. This is an example of an actual extended plant count recommendation or EPC recommendation. This patient's severe pain in his neck and his back entitle him to 99 plants. and 33 ounces so that he can make his concentrates and edibles. This document was actually found in a vehicle that was pulled over in the Midwest with over 200 pounds of marijuana on its way to the East Coast. Then, as I'm sure most of you know, in 2012, Colorado voters approved Amendment 64, which allowed for recreational marijuana use and production. It allows adult residents to grow up to 6 marijuana plants. But this also opened up some new loopholes that traffickers have been able to exploit. First, Amendment 64 allows an individual to possess any harvested marijuana or marijuana product that is derived from his 6 plants. So if an individual is in possession of a large amount of marijuana, he can simply claim that it all came from his 6 recreational plants, that he's a really, really good grower. Secondly, Amendment 64 allows any adult in Colorado to assist any other adult in Colorado in possessing, growing, processing, or transporting their marijuana. So consequently, large grows or large quantities of processed marijuana within a residence are often justified through the claim that that resident is assisting others. Again, there's no mechanism at the state or local level to document or regulate recreational marijuana home grows or these growing co-ops. So there's no practical means for local police to verify whose plants are being grown or whose marijuana is being stored in any given location. Now, the state is starting to see residential grows as a problem. In January of 2018, 2 new laws went into effect. One places a limit of 12 plants that can be grown within a residential property. Now, the law does not restrict an individual from growing more than 12 plants. It merely restricts him from growing more than 12 plants within a residential property, which is defined as a property with a residential structure, and that does include any other buildings on the property. Higher plant counts may still be grown on non-residential property, such as industrial or commercially zoned properties, or simply on land that does not contain a residential structure. The other new law clarifies what the term assist means in Amendment 64. It specifies that assist does not mean that someone can grow someone else's recreational marijuana for them. And this was aimed at the large grows where an individual claims that he's growing recreational plants for each one of his family members and friends in order to justify the large grow. So the question that we often get is whether these new measures have had an impact on DTO marijuana production in Colorado. And from our perspective, they have not, for a number of reasons. First, DTOs have invested heavily in acquiring and equipping the grow operations that they have here in Colorado. Much of the grow equipment, the air conditioning units in the black market grow sites, those were all transported to Colorado from other states where they previously had marijuana grow operations. Also, they've invested in the properties themselves. DTOs have purchased many of the grow houses. They also tend to rent many of them. And when they do this, they'll often pay hefty deposits up front, or they'll pay higher than market rent payments up front for a year or more, mostly to keep the property owner away. So at this point, they have established massive grow networks throughout the state with all that equipment and with those properties that they've acquired. Marijuana production operations are firmly established at this point. They're well entrenched in many communities throughout Colorado. There are literally thousands of DTO-operated large-scale marijuana grow sites throughout the state. We know from our investigations, specifically through intercepted conversations, that they have become comfortable hiding in plain sight. They're taking their chances that they're not going to get caught, even with the new 12-plant cap. Some DTOs are moving into many rural communities where they can be more isolated, and this is clearly a problem for local law enforcement and sheriff's offices in those areas. They are often overwhelmed simply by the sheer numbers of grow operations in their jurisdictions. There are signs that DTOs are adapting to the new laws by acquiring more warehouse space. We've even seen them setting up grows in underground bunkers and portable grows in large trailers that can be moved from site to site. Other DTOs have acquired properties that are used as grow sites that will be concentrated in certain suburban areas in certain neighborhoods. They'll make a concerted effort to acquire a number of properties in the same neighborhoods, in the same streets, in the same cul-de-sac. This helps to insulate them from other residents around. We've seen them purchase numerous properties in new communities, homes that haven't even been built yet. They'll buy up all or most of the lots on a particular street or in a particular neighborhood. Also, some of these DTOs have acquired many local businesses in Colorado that are used to facilitate not only their trafficking, but the money laundering that is associated with their trafficking. Another important factor to note is that marijuana growers have well-established support systems in Colorado. Obviously, there's no shortage of grow stores to supply them with equipment or seeds or fertilizer, whatever they need. There are a lot of employees at grow stores who have side jobs working as bud tenders or trimmers in black market marijuana grows. They pick up a lot of good contacts working in the grow stores. But it goes well beyond that. There are property managers, real estate investors specializing in finding residential properties and warehouse space for marijuana growers. They'll charge well above fair market value, but DTOs are willing to pay that in order to expand their operations. Online listings for available properties will advertise that they're 420 friendly, or they have unfinished basements, or they have outbuildings or garages. There are also grow operations that are strictly limited to providing clones or starter plants, black market growers. So consequently, if law enforcement executes a search warrant and destroys all the plants within a home grow, they'll have new starter plants growing within the same locations with the same grow equipment sometimes within weeks. So it's easy to see why so many traffickers decide to come to Colorado to set up their home grows. It's incredibly profitable and it's not too risky. With just an average amount of knowledge and experience, a grower can produce 1 to 2 pounds of marijuana per plant per 90-day growing cycle. Now that's conservative. Many of the home grows that we see contain huge plants capable of producing a lot more than that, but we'll stick to 2 pounds per plant per 90-day growing cycle. So 6 marijuana plants will potentially produce 48 pounds of marijuana in a year. That's 12 pounds multiplied again by the 4 growing cycles. Now in-state, black market marijuana prices have dropped to about $800 a pound. So with little effort and little risk, a person can make at least $38,000 in a year from his 6 legal plants. Now, if the person is willing to take the marijuana out of state, where it commands more like $3,000 a pound, he stands to make $144,000 in a year from just his 6 plants. At a yield of 1 to 2 pounds per plant per growing cycle, which again is conservative, a 50-plant grow will result in 200 to 400 pounds of finished marijuana in a year. That's about 493 joints a day. At $3,000 a pound, which again is an accurate average out-of-state price for Colorado weed, that will earn up to $1.2 million in a year. A 99-plant grow will result in 400 to 800 pounds of marijuana in a year, or about 1,000 joints a day. That will earn up to $2.4 million in a year. Most of the trafficking organizations producing marijuana in Colorado have the experience and the resources and the know-how to produce at least 3 pounds per 60 to 90-day growing cycle per plant. So if you do the math there, for every 100 plants that a DTO cultivates, it can potentially produce 12 to 1,800 pounds of marijuana per year. Sold out of state at $3,000 a pound, that's as much as $5.4 million in a year from 100 plants. And so we have a lot of criminal organizations in Colorado operating networks of grow houses in order to produce large amounts of marijuana to send out of state. And this is what we have in thousands of homes throughout Colorado. These grows are in high-end neighborhoods, in suburbs, in rural communities, in every corner of the state. All the photos that I'm going to show you, these aren't off Shutterstock or anything. These are out of grows in Colorado that we've been in. Since fiscal year 14, DEA offices in Colorado have been involved in over 500 search warrants related to black market marijuana home grows. We've destroyed 151,000 plants. We've seized 16,000 pounds of harvested marijuana from home grows in Colorado. This is not including the large outdoor grows that we encounter on public lands. This is just the indoor home grows. So 151,000 plants. If you figure 2 pounds per plant per 90-day growing cycle, that's potentially 1.2 million pounds per year. At $3,000 a pound, that's almost $3.6 billion in a year. 15,000 pounds of harvested marijuana at $3,000 a pound, that's $48 million. And that's just what we've taken out of the home grows in Colorado. These grows were discovered after officers responded to a call of shots fired at a home. The husband and wife, both transplants from Florida, were found to have 2 residential grows actually. One had 352 plants, 33 pounds of harvested marijuana, and 1,300 clone plants. These are drying racks that are filled with harvested marijuana buds in a basement of a residential grow. This photo is from a 2018 search warrant. 4 adults and 2 kids lived in this home. One of the adults had just been previously arrested and deported to Cuba just a few months earlier. These are photos from a 100 plant grow that was discovered in early 2018 by firefighters who were evacuating homes near an ongoing wildfire near Fort Carson in Colorado Springs. A 780 plant indoor home grow was discovered in rural Park County in 2018. Along with the weed, sheriff's deputies found cocaine and diverted pharmaceutical drugs. So what do you do with 780 plants? Well, in this case, they ran them through a chipper. The El Paso County Sheriff's Office seized 66 plants and 20 pounds of harvested marijuana from a grow in this house. But just take a look at all the chemicals and pesticides and fertilizers that were found in that home. Where do you suppose all of that stuff ends up? So residential homes obviously were not designed to grow marijuana. The grow lights and the equipment that's required to grow large marijuana grows, they require a lot more power than what's available in most residential properties. So these groups will alter the electrical systems. The wiring and the ballast, they get super hot, which has resulted in many fires like this one. This was a $700,000 home in a gated country club community that backs right up to National Forest land. The house burned in January. If it had been a dry day in July, obviously that would have likely turned into a major wildfire. The ballasts and the electrical alterations at the house were determined to be the cause of the fire. The elderly homeowner had no idea that her tenants had converted the basement of her house into a 58 plant marijuana grow operation. The tenants had recently relocated from Florida. More and more, we're seeing these groups tap directly into underground power lines, bypassing utility meters, another huge potential for fire. It's also the cause of frequent blown transformers and blackouts, the cost of which are passed on to the customers who actually pay their power bills. Flammable fertilizers and chemicals are often stored inside these grow houses. All of these pose clear hazards to firefighters or police officers responding to the residents in an emergency situation. They also tend to cut through things like flooring and structural support to run their ventilation tubing and their wiring. The photo on the left there, that's actually a second floor bedroom. They had cut out the subfloor in order to run the ventilation tube. So a firefighter or a police responder would have no idea that if he steps on that, he's going to fall straight through to the floor below. In late 2018, authorities condemned a grow house in Pueblo due to the electrical alterations and the unknown chemicals that were found there. So this was a 700 plant grow divided among 4 grow houses. I did the math and that still equals more than 12 plants per residential grow. The marijuana market in Colorado, both the black market and the state licensed market, are oversaturated at this point. The prices of weed have dropped dramatically within the state. So we're seeing a lot more of the hash oil labs pop up. Again, highly concentrated hash oil has become a lot more profitable. This is a clip from January of 2018 that kind of highlights some of those dangers.
Today, we just got some pictures from inside an extremely dangerous marijuana grow. Deputies tell us they found about 60 plants, dozens of pounds of processed marijuana, and a hash oil lab. Deputies in Teller County busted this grow just this morning. This is near Woodland Park.
11 News reporter Catherine Silver is live now in our newsroom to talk more about this. Catherine, the sheriff's office says what was in that house was a potentially deadly combination.
That's right. Investigators said this thing could have exploded at any moment. That hash oil has all kinds of chemicals in it that are extremely flammable. Investigators say it's just as dangerous as a meth lab. I'm going to show you what lab looks like. Take a look. This is what deputies found when they raided the house. They say there's so many dangerous chemicals and gases inside there that they can't even go in until they can make sure that they're safe. Deputies say this product is typically sold on the black market, and it's illegal to manufacture in Colorado because it is so dangerous. Authorities on scene told us on a windy day like today, this lab could have easily started a wildfire if it exploded.
We're just under the minimum for the red flag warning today. I know some other counties are under a red flag warning. This thing could have exploded at any time.
Right now, deputies are cracking down on these illegal grows in Teller County. Just yesterday, 3 other grows were busted. I'll take a closer look at just how big of a problem it is and how many are connected coming up at 5:30.
So there are 2 primary means by which marijuana that is produced in Colorado reaches the markets in the East Coast and Midwest. First are independent brokers. These are usually Colorado-based. They find home grow sources and they set up deals for out-of-state buyers. Generally, the out-of-state customers will make the trip to Colorado, or they'll send a courier to Colorado to pick up the marijuana. This protects the Colorado growers and the brokers from the risks associated with transporting large amounts of marijuana or large amounts of cash across state lines. Now, deals like this have created plenty of opportunities for ripoffs. An out-of-state customer who travels to Colorado with a large amount of cash to buy weed from a broker that he found on Craigslist often ends up getting ripped off by the broker, who takes his cash but offers him no marijuana in return. Or sometimes it's the buyer who decides he'd rather get his weed for free, and so he robs the seller of his marijuana at gunpoint. So we're seeing more and more of these out-of-state buyers traveling with weapons in order to protect their money and their weed, and this obviously presents a risk to the troopers in Kansas and Nebraska and Oklahoma who happen to pull them over. In late 2019, the Colorado State Fusion Center published a report noting that several law enforcement agencies in Colorado reported cases in which individuals used advertisements in online marketplaces such as Craigslist or Bud Trader to arrange in-person meetings with would-be buyers. Advertisers frequently offered to deliver marijuana, the marijuana concentrates, and a wide variety of other illicit drugs, but after meeting with the victims, the suspects would proceed to rob them, frequently at gunpoint. Sometimes Craigslist sales don't go quite as planned. A Colorado sheriff advertised on Craigslist to sell his personal SUV. Well, he got an offer on the vehicle, but instead of cash, he was offered 4 pounds of weed. So he accepted the offer. Another thing that happens frequently is that large home grows are targeted for break-ins and robberies, particularly when it's known that they've just harvested the weed inside. This video is from the home surveillance system at a private residence. The occupant, who lived there with his wife and child, had an extended plant count medical marijuana recommendation for 50 plants. So aside from the hundreds and hundreds of independent brokers and growers, we have bona fide criminal drug trafficking organizations capitalizing on Colorado's lax environment. What we have seen are large poly-drug, often poly-criminal organizations set up large networks of indoor marijuana grows in Colorado. Many times the DTO hierarchy on the East Coast maintains direct oversight of their marijuana grow networks in Colorado. They send cells of workers to establish and maintain the residential grows. They dispatch coordinators to Colorado to acquire and equip the residential properties, to oversee the grow operations and to orchestrate large out-of-state shipments. Operational funding to pay for supplies and utilities and to purchase the grow properties is often sent from out of state. Sometimes DTO leaders will travel to Colorado in order to oversee large harvests or large shipments. As I've mentioned, these groups are largely poly-drug and poly-criminal. In their East Coast and Midwest markets, they distribute not only marijuana, but other drugs as well, including cocaine and heroin and pharmaceuticals. These guys were members of a Florida-based Cuban cargo theft ring. They stole a tractor trailer, the entire rig, as it left a pharmaceutical distribution facility in North Carolina. The load contained almost 9 million hydrocodone tablets. Within just a few months of the heist, 2 of these 3 showed up in Colorado, operating marijuana grow houses. In fact, Hurtado Cruz, featured on the left there, he was arrested in a Colorado Springs marijuana grow house. When the U.S. Attorney's Office in Miami rounded up 55 of its most violent offenders, one of them was found by U.S. Marshals in Colorado Springs, operating a grow house. At the time of his arrest, officers seized 56 pounds of marijuana packaged and ready for shipment to Florida. In February of 2019, sheriff's deputies conducting marijuana enforcement operations in a rural area in Colorado pulled over a speeding car. The driver handed them a fake Florida driver's license. Officers patted him down and found a loaded handgun. So he tried to flee at that point, but it turns out the guy has an extensive criminal history in Florida that included forgery, theft, grand theft charges, larceny, illegal weapons possession, armed robbery, marijuana cultivation and possession, and synthetic drugs. He was actually wanted out of Florida on 2 felony charges. He also had previous charges of fraudulent identity and police obstruction in a neighboring Colorado County, in Douglas County. So there are examples like this just about every week in just about every corner of the state. Colorado's marijuana laws have attracted folks that behave badly and now reside in our communities. Some of the DTOs growing marijuana in Colorado are deeply involved in financial crimes in other areas of the country where their command and control elements operate. Things like insurance fraud, mortgage fraud, credit card skimming. And so now we have seen an increase in these crimes, specifically credit card skimming in Colorado. In fact, we've been made aware of many DTO grow houses through local police departments that are investigating credit card skimming operations. But it works both ways. In this case, a search warrant on a marijuana grow led to the discovery of a large credit card skimming operation. We've seen home invasions in which DTO members rip off other grows when marijuana is harvested. So when a marijuana grow is ready to harvest, it's pretty obvious. A lot of activity starts to happen at the house. They bring in huge trimming machines. They bring in large numbers of workers to trim the plants. So other traffickers and other criminals see this happening, and once the plants are harvested, they force their way in at gunpoint to take the weed. So what we're finding is that most of the workers within these grow houses are frequently armed in order to prevent these ripoffs from other criminal organizations. Weapons have been found at many of the DTO grow sites in Colorado at which DEA has executed search warrants. In rural communities in Colorado, where there are known to be many grow operations, there have been reports of DTO members casing out other homes in the community to identify which ones have marijuana grows because those are potential targets for ripoff. Some rural sheriff's offices are dealing with ripoff teams that have been sent from out of state, specifically Florida. These teams are targeting local home growers and robbing them of their harvested marijuana. A source reported to us that DTO members will hang out at the grow stores. So when a customer purchases large amounts of grow equipment, they'll follow them away from the store in order to identify the location of the grow, because again, it's a potential target for a ripoff. There have been homicides that result from grow house ripoff attempts. In 2018, in El Paso County, one individual was killed and another shot at a DTO-operated grow site. The shooter was later shot and killed by sheriff's deputies, but not before a deputy was wounded in the exchange. This was the scene at a DTO grow house in a small town in southern Colorado a couple of years ago. This was first reported as a home invasion during which the homeowner shot and killed the assailant. Turned out, however, that the shooter and the victim were both DTO members and they were actually partners in the grow. One killed the other one, so he didn't have to split the proceeds. The victim had previously surfaced in at least 2 other grow operations that we knew about in northern Colorado. Some of the cells in Colorado have smuggled individuals directly from other countries to work in the grows. These people are sometimes forced to work for the organizations for prolonged periods of time in order to pay the DTO back for smuggling them into the country and setting them up in a grow operation. Sometimes when they're nearing the end of this sort of indentured servitude, the DTO will send members in to steal a harvest or 2, which then requires that they work for the organization for even longer. Likewise, there have been instances of female workers brought to Colorado by the DTO to work in the marijuana grows. Well, when the grow gets ripped off or doesn't produce enough, or their husband or boyfriend gets arrested, the DTO forces them into prostitution in order to pay back. A couple of years ago, DEA executed a search warrant at a DTO-operated grow site in rural western Colorado. There were over a dozen undocumented Chinese workers at that site. A couple of them cooperated, at least initially, and they told agents that they had been working in the LA garment district and one day were just loaded onto a van and told they were going to go work at a farm in Colorado. The presence of DTO marijuana production networks has spawned instances of violence and intimidation in some communities. Members of a DTO in rural southern Colorado openly displayed weapons in order to intimidate neighbors and utility workers, even firefighters, who attempted to come onto their properties. On one occasion, a neighbor reported having shots fired over her head by a DTO member who felt she was walking too closely to their grow houses. In 2018, a sheriff's deputy in an unmarked vehicle was followed and harassed by another vehicle while he was driving on a remote road late at night in an area that's full of black market marijuana grows. When the vehicle was pulled over, officers essentially found a ripoff team, 4 out-of-state males in a rented car, a loaded shotgun, crowbar, clippers, all commonly used in marijuana grow ripoffs. This is a clip from a case that we investigated out of our office here last year.
What you're looking at is one of the largest black market marijuana investigations in Colorado history. More than 200 homes searched, 8 businesses in 8 different counties. The problem solvers rode along in the middle of this large operation.
You're talking about hundreds of police officers that are involved in these type of raids.
And now we're hearing the results.
Those who traffic in marijuana or any other illicit substance in the state of Colorado, it's not if, it's when you will be prosecuted.
The DEA, U.S. Attorney, and District Attorneys announcing over 80,000 marijuana plants and over 2 tons of finished product were taken.
The legalization of marijuana has created all kinds of problems.
These are pure black market, producing large quantities of marijuana for distribution out of state through criminal enterprises.
Both federal agents and prosecutors saying illegal grows and sale operations in Colorado are on the rise.
We cannot put the genie back into the bong. Can't do it. This is going to be an ongoing issue for Colorado moving forward.
In this particular case, the charges vary. Some include manufacturing, possession, and conspiracy.
So One of the common themes that we hear frequently from sources that we talk to is that it's really hard to make money running a legitimate marijuana industry in Colorado. At this point, the market is saturated. Marijuana businesses are not only competing with each other, they're competing against the homegrown marijuana that can be sold over Craigslist without the 25% or more sales tax. So one of the things that the marijuana industry is doing is to increase profits by developing high THC products like shatter and wax and concentrates. There's no legal limit on marijuana potency in Colorado, and the industry is showing little restraint in developing strains of marijuana with high concentrations of THC and low levels of CBD, which is the actual medicinal part of medical marijuana. This is an ad for a Denver dispensary. They proudly offer smokable weed that's 30% and higher in THC content. That's the norm for marijuana now. In the 1970s and 1980s, the average THC content for marijuana was anywhere from 2 to 4%. But today's marijuana has been genetically modified to the point that even the black market grows consistently produce plant material that's 25% or higher THC content. Now, to get the THC content higher, they need to reduce the CBD content. CBD actually counteracts the THC. So the more CBD, the less high you get. So they've genetically modified the plants to produce almost no CBD. Again, even in a black market grows, CBD potency is consistently less than 1%. Yet these are the grows that are the medical marijuana grows. But that's not all. The industry also offers concentrate products well over 90% THC. At those levels, THC is a powerful psychoactive substance, every bit as addictive and potentially destructive as the hard drugs. The science is in on that. It's particularly destructive in teenage and adolescent brains. But again, there's no legal limit on THC potency in Colorado, and the industry is showing little restraint in developing products with high concentrations of THC. You see this ad, this dispensary also offers THCA. What is THCA? It's the latest product on the market. It's THC in its raw form. The pure THC becomes activated when it's heated, thus removing the A or the acid, so the product is vaped or dabbed in order to get extremely high. Note the appearance of it. It looks like meth. And like meth, it's a hard drug. Some of the online forums call it THC crack because it's so potent. And kids are able to vape it in schools and at home in devices like this, which are also widely available. This is a news story from last year on the effects
of recreational marijuana in almost a dozen states shows how our attitude towards the drug is changing. Something else has changed, the drug itself. Newly developed strains of marijuana are far stronger than what people were smoking in the past. Carter Evans takes a look at what can happen when people encounter this very potent pot.
How long is your recovery going to take?
A lifetime.
20-year-old Colton says he got hooked on marijuana in high school when it became legal in Colorado 5 years ago. But the cheers back then have turned into unintended consequences for Colton and others much younger.
Typically young children around the age of 2, mostly getting into caregivers, whether it's parents, grandparents, babysitters, marijuana products, often edible products.
Dr. Sam Wong's findings from Colorado's Children's Hospital are included in a new nationwide study showing a 27% increase in children and teenagers getting emergency treatment for marijuana toxicity, 70% from states with legalized marijuana.
In severe circumstances, it can affect how they're breathing and make them comatose and be put on a ventilator.
An exponential increase in marijuana's psychoactive ingredient, THC, tetrahydrocannabinoid, is at the center of the crisis. THC levels jumped from 3.7% to more than 20%, and some cannabis concentrates contain close to 100%.
Once it was legalized, it was so easy to get it at the highest grade in the strongest form, straight from a dispensary.
Colton's dad believes high levels of THC fueled his son's addiction.
this nuclear strength, chemically engineered, rocket science PhDs coming in and making this stuff stronger than any strains of weed anyone has ever known.
Is there anything the industry can do to regulate the levels of THC in these products?
I mean, what's important about potency is that the consumer knows what they're buying and what they're consuming. And that is through consistent testing standards and labeling standards on these products. And that only exists under the regulated markets.
States that legalize marijuana have generated almost $3 billion in tax revenue since 2014, when Colorado first started sales.
The state was highly focused on how much tax revenue it could generate from marijuana sales. Nobody really spent a lot of time thinking about, well, how is this going to impact some of the younger community?
The impact on his son became clear when Colton was failing in college, couldn't quit cannabis, and then asked to go to rehab.
How hard was it to go ask for help?
It's the hardest thing to do. I mean, the worst part of it is that until you do that, it doesn't get better. It only gets worse.
For CBS This Morning Saturday, Carter Evans, Los Angeles.
So our sources have told us time and time again that there are many individuals in the licensed marijuana industry that are also operating in the black market. Marijuana is being sold out the back door, unreported. Excess marijuana is pilfered by employees who then sell it on the black market. High-producing plants are logged into the system as dead loss, only to be moved off-site into residential black market marijuana operations. We've learned of marijuana business owners who launder their marijuana cash by purchasing residential properties that are then turned into grow houses supplying the black market. Just like the extended plant count medical marijuana allowance is exploited by large-scale black market growers, it's also can be exploited by traffickers through the licensed industry. Sources have told us that trafficking organizations will pay individuals to get their EPC medical marijuana recommendation and use that to purchase large quantities of marijuana and marijuana concentrates to divert and sell on the black market. So under the medical marijuana system in Colorado, if a patient has a recommendation for a pound of marijuana, that's a pound of anything. 1 pound of marijuana plant material is the same as 1 pound of shatter or edibles or THC concentrate. So EPC patients can acquire large quantities of concentrate products from dispensaries to divert and sell on the black market. Now, Amendment 64 specifies that, that marijuana business owners cannot require customer information beyond what is required for a liquor store to check. So a recreational marijuana customer has to show ID to prove that he or she is over 21. That's it. The fact that that customer is legally limited to possessing 1 ounce of marijuana, yet he's been to 10 other dispensaries that day and purchased 1 ounce of marijuana at each one of them, well, that's none of the state's business, according to Amendment 64. So this has led to a problem that MED, the Marijuana Enforcement Division in the state, refers to as looping. Individuals making multiple purchases of marijuana from multiple businesses on the same day and then diverting it and selling it out of state or to kids. Some of you may require this or may recall this case from last year in Denver.
And we have new details tonight about a large-scale pot raid. Neighbors tell Denver 7 they've been complaining about sweet leaf dispensaries for as long as they can remember. 13 people have now been arrested as part of a year-long investigation. Here is Denver 7's Megan Lopez.
It's another busy Friday in West Denver, with cars and shoppers just about anywhere you look. But when customers arrived at this marijuana dispensary, one after the other, they were all turned away.
That's a bummer. That sucks because I come here all the time.
8 Sweet Leaf locations were raided on Thursday, resulting in 13 arrests.
I say it's about time.
The stores and people who run them are accused of something the marijuana industry calls looping.
So here's how the neighbors say that looping scheme would work. The people would park their cars right in front of their houses in this neighborhood. They would then walk right around the corner to one of those Sweet Leaf dispensaries and buy as much marijuana as possible. They'd return to their car, drop that off, and then go back again to buy more. They would do this over and over again all day. And then they're, making illegal drug deals in front of my house.
Neighbors say they knew this was happening. Some had stunning stories to share.
Yeah, they'll order a pizza. I had a friend in town who decided to go confront one of the guys and basically say, you know, you need to take your business elsewhere. And he threatened him with a gun.
One neighbor who didn't want to be on camera noticed something even more bizarre from one of the buyers.
He would come to the marijuana shop, make a purchase, zoom down the street on the hoverboard, put his purchase in his truck or car, whatever, and come back and forth and back and forth.
Now these neighbors are hoping these shuttered shops stay that way.
It's really sad.
Yeah.
They ruined our neighborhood. And maybe, by the grace of God, they'll be gone.
In Denver, Megan Lopez, Denver 7.
So that's all I have for you today. My apologies. I think I went over time a little bit, but I'd be happy to answer any questions at the end.
Wendi, thank you. Frankly, I am almost speechless. This is actually more evil than what I even dreamt it was. Thank you. We are going to reserve the questions until the very end.